As Juliet said, I want to talk about Fratelli Tutti as a potential framework for Catholic mental health ministry. And this is kind of an idea that came about in a conversation with a colleague of ours, Brother Keith, who is a big supporter of the Catholic mental health ministry movement. And he just in passing, he said, have you considered Fratelli Tutti as something that might inform the ministry?" And so it got me thinking and reflecting on that. And so when I think Joe asked me about speaking tonight, I was excited to do this topic because I think this is going to lead to a paper or something, but it's in the formative stages. So I appreciate you being with me at this point and in the process, because it's definitely not something I'm that's completely um, completely done as a framework. So what I want to do tonight is talk a little bit about what I do in mental health ministry, what the ministry is, and then get into the idea of Fratelli Tutti as and its connection to lay ministry, and then move into its potential as a framework for Catholic mental health ministry. And then we'll have time for discussion. So, with that, the other thing I want to mention, and I shared this with Juliet and Oliver as we were setting up. Um, I don't have any background in theology, right? I'm here as a lay person. My background is in Catholic uh, community mental health and psychology, and I've been a Catholic all my life, and I'm a Eucharistic minister, and so I approach this as somebody who's um, I feel very blessed to be part of our church, and I can see the potential for how the church can be a healing presence in the world, and so that's why I'm here, right? So with that, let me talk a little bit about our institute at the University of San Diego. So as you may know, USD and the Franciscan School of Theology are now co-located, and I'm very, very happy about that. And it's led to some pretty wonderful things. So at the University of San Diego, I am a faculty member in what's called the School of Leadership and Education Sciences, and specifically in the Department of Counseling and Marital Family Therapy. And part of my role there is I'm fortunate to be the executive director of our Catholic Institute for Mental Health Ministry. And so we started this in 2018, and it's really been a wonderful experience to promote Catholic mental health ministry now onto a global stage. I just returned from Rome from a conference that was focused on mental health ministry and sponsored by the Pontifical Institute for Life. And it had anybody said to me, in less than 10 years, this is going to be a global movement, I would have said, really, this is a San Diego thing. I mean, we created the institute really because the diocese in San Diego had initiated this, and we wanted to promote that basically in dioceses in the U.S., mainly in the Western U.S., that were interested in doing this. So I see Mary Promotas here. Bishop Dolan, who was our auxiliary at the time, was very instrumental in getting this started, and he was also at the conference with us last week. But at any rate, so we settled on, and Bishop Dolan's been one of our advisors, a member of our advisory board since the beginning. And so we settled on the Gospel of John of abundant life as really kind of our guiding, our some of our guiding principles around the church being able to help, and heal by inclusion, right? By bringing people in and bringing people into community, which I'm a big believer in. That's a big part of any healing, whether it's a mental health issue or a physical health issue. But we heal best when we're in community with each other. We do many things better in community, right? And that's one of the processes that was really facilitated. Um, so, like I said, we've been around since about 2018, and we work very closely now with the International Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers, and this was the other group that sponsored the conference at the Vatican last week. And this is our second conference we've had. I'm on their board. And so what we do with the association is we really support the work by developing educational materials. So print resources. Juliet mentioned our implementation guidelines. Those are now in their second edition. It's now been translated into Spanish and Italian. And then we've just released a workbook that accompanies that, that's focused on mental health first aid within a Catholic mental health ministry context. And so that's, we got our first batch of hard copies up, and then we're going to put up the PDF on the association website. And these are free, right? We don't really charge much unless you want a print copy. So there's a nominal charge for the book because we have to pay for the printing of that. But the PDFs are out there for free. Um, we also support mental health ministry implementation, as Juliet mentioned, through things like this. So we want to talk about it. We want to go out there and talk to the diocese periodically here locally, and I was at RE Congress last year, and so we just want to get the word out about this movement and how you go about doing these and the obvious benefits of it. And then finally, my graduate assistants, through an epiphany I had about 7 years ago that I'm not very good at social media, have taken over our social media accounts, and so they're wonderful at that, and they do things on social media. They'll interview folks and post the interviews and just do a lot of very creative things. And so I'm very proud of their work on that. So that's our Instagram. That's our main social media outlet. We also use X, but it's not. I don't know. I don't think it's as important as or as subscribed to at the same level that Instagram is. So if you're an Instagram user, you can find us there. We do have a Facebook account. We don't really do much on Facebook. We the only reason we have Facebook is to get the engagement statistics from Instagram because those two are connected. Technologically, you have to have Facebook to be able to do that analysis on Instagram. So that's probably more than you need to know about the back end of that. But I'm going to move on from there. So this idea of Catholic mental health ministry, I wanted to share some of the imagery that I just found by doing a basic search on Google, and this is what I mean about it. Really, it's developed into something much bigger than what we ever intended it to be, which is just a huge blessing. So this first image up on top here, San Diego Diocesan Mental Health Ministry Network. That's really where it started at an organized level. I mean, there's been I know a deacon and his wife in Chicago who's a spiritual director, Tom and Rita Lambert, and they've been doing this literally on the streets of the south side of Chicago for 40 years, right? Working with severely mentally ill folks and that's been his diaconate ministry. Uh, San Diego was the first diocese that really had any kind of organized ministry, and so they organized about 20 parishes in the diocese into this mental health ministry network, which continues today. And so that was really our entry point at the university. And so what we did is we went out and we spent about a year doing field work in these dioceses or in these parishes to see what they were doing. And then from there, we developed the first edition of our guidelines. And it's really, it was meant to replicate the San Diego model, which is a very, lay driven ministry. And that's another thing that's really attracted me to it is it's a very grassroots kind of ministry. And I think there's a real authenticity to that and it resonates with folks that are in need. So there's also Rochester area here has their mental health ministry. I love the image they use of the bunch of folks, different ages, joined hands. This image here comes from I think Cleveland, and Catholic Charities is involved in this one here. It's more looks a little more conceptual. And then there's a large movement now in South Africa, and this worldwide graphic here is advertising a publication they put out in South Africa, and it's this issue is focused on mental health ministry, and they're very very well represented at these conferences, and I've done a couple of Zoom calls, webinars with them as well, and it's really taken off there, not just in South Africa, but also in other parts of Africa. So, what is this thing? What is this thing we call mental health ministry? And I like this image, and this is from a few years ago when I was a Boy Scout leader, and we were in the Grand Canyon hiking down, and it's fundamentally the ministry is a ministry of accompaniment, right? And so I like this image to represent that. So there was another leader, obviously, who took the picture, but in Boy Scouting, especially in this type of what they call high adventure scouting, you let the boys lead, right? But you're right there accompanying them. And in this case, what we were doing is you were hiking down. If you can see, there's some color down here. There's a few tents. That was the camp, and at that camp, that's where the water was. There was a water source there. So we were hiking down into the canyon to get to that water source and that encampment. Um, but the whole time the boys are leading, and then the adults are walking behind and accompanying with them. And that's I think it's a good metaphor for the ministry. It's not a ministry of um, treatment, right? You're not directing the folks. It's just about being with them and being with them as a prayerful companion and listening and sharing. I also really emphasize this is not a clinical ministry. This is not something you need a background in psychology or therapy or social work for. You just need to be open to being with folks and praying with them and being a companion. In fact, there are with that said, there's a lot of clinicians that are involved in this ministry, but not for the reason you would think. It's like I find this attractive because I can talk about things that you really wouldn't be appropriate to talk about in a psychotherapy context, like you know scripture or religious issues. So and a lot of other clinicians are attracted to the ministry for that reason. Now, with that saying, what I do is I encourage the clinical folks, meaning the providers, the psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., to take more of a organizational role in the ministry, not necessarily be the front line lay ministers, because there is a potential for you know dual roles and some confusion around what you're actually doing there. But there's a huge need just in the behind the scenes to get the ministries organized and functioning and all that. The other piece of this, and we really emphasize this also, and again, symbolically represented here by this backpack, there's a toolkit that we really encourage people to develop, and it's what we call mental health literacy, right? And then some basic understanding of mental health first aid. It's not difficult. We have coursework now on the association website. It's free, and like I said, the print materials, the resources are there for free as well. So it just takes a few hours to get yourself oriented on this. Obviously, more if you want to read into the books, but the books are focused more on getting the ministries established, and so that's something the ministry leaders would be more involved with. But again, it's this idea that this is a lay ministry, it's grassroots, and does not require any advanced training to do, except for discernment and the other things that would be necessary for lay ministry. So in practice, what does this actually look like? So typically there's these at the parish level. There's some interesting work being done in Catholic schools that are using this to sort of augment what they might have for student services, or if there's a campus ministry on at the site. But again, we want parish level folks who serve as prayerful companions. One of the roles is to provide referrals as needed. Our diocese does a great job with having a referral network of providers who are Catholic friendly, is what we call it. So they actually sign an agreement with the diocese that they're going to respect the faith as they work with folks. And so being able to provide that information to parishioners that have mental health issues is very, very important. Um, the other important aspect of this in practice is providing parish wide education. And so doing sessions like this, inviting guest speakers. At my own parish at St. Bridget, we've had folks coming, marriage and family therapists coming in to talk about divorce and the psychological impact of that. In the Catholic community, we've had folks come in to talk about substance abuse. We've had folks to come in and talk about childhood disorders. We have a large Navy population here at St. Bridget, and so there's a lot of younger kids. So we've talked about neurodevelopmental disorders, all sorts of things. And so, typically the speaker will come, like what we're doing tonight, at the parish hall, and then afterward, there's um, Q&A, and then after that there's a lot of lingering. We'll have ministry materials available to connect people to the ministry, and that's really I think where you see that idea of um, the parish becomes this inclusive aspect of the church where people come kind of are brought in to the church community, and it's just wonderful to see that in action. We had one, um, we did a prayer service during, I think it was during May, around the Feast of St. Dymphna, who's a patron for mental health and providers. And we, afterward, a woman who was new to the parish talked to my wife was also participated in that. My wife and I about she had struggled with bipolar for most of her life, and she was, I don't know, maybe in her 40s, early 50s now. And she said she was in a good space in terms of her treatment plan, but what she wanted was she wanted a spiritual home, right? So she wanted connection to a parish, and she felt like that was something that was really lacking, especially in the decades preceding, as she struggled with bipolar disorder. And so she participated in this the presentation, and then afterwards we had small prayer groups, and looked at prayers from different saints that are associated with mental health in the church, and she connected with some folks, and then a few weeks later we saw her after mass, and she was there with a friend she had met, and people were addressing her by name, and we were talking, and then later I saw her, and she had gotten involved in some other ministry group, I think the Healing Prayer Ministry, and so it was just really, really a great example of how this works. And so, we're not there to treat the bipolar disorder; we're there to you know include her and welcome her into the parish, and it just it worked out very, very, very well. Um, so that's I think that's the essence of the ministry, is just being there, and we'll talk about encounter, right? Or, having an open heart and being able to connect with people that might otherwise be not always included in a parish life. So at any rate, the other elements is I really encourage team members to discern their involvement in the ministry. This shouldn't be about the lay minister, right? And I say that because unfortunately, I've met folks who really are doing it for their own personal reasons, not in terms of being there to help others, but they might want to lecture people or have folks talk about things like deliverance, and that's not helpful, right? That's not why you do this. So that discernment's very important, and that's why I encourage the some basic level of training in what we call mental health ministry or mental health literacy. And the literacy portion focuses on just a basic understanding of mental health and kind of the what we know about the biology of this as well as the social factors. And so there's not in trying to dispel myths. There's a lot of stigma around this whole area, and so just want a very basic understanding of this is not a character defect. This is not uh, uh, because of demonic issues. This is something that just, it's a natural occurrence. It's a natural variation, and this is how it's, how we can address this, both as a church community and obviously how it's addressed in the medical community. The other element that's really important is pastoral support. And so it's very difficult to have any ministry, as you probably know, at a parish level or at a diocesan level if you don't have pastoral support for the ministry. So we, encourage folks to get this explicitly, like some letter of support or something like that. Um, Mentioned mental health literacy and psychological first aid, so I'm not going to return to that. We also encourage a ministry plan. And so it's a basic, it could be a one pager, just what are we doing and how are we going to do this? And it just helps people. I mean, for me, and this is probably the psychologist in me talking, but there's how do you orient people that are new to the ministry? And so if you don't have some plan that is agreed upon, it can be very much personality driven. And so because there is turnover in these ministries, you don't have the team there for perpetuity. So we need some kind of a guiding document. Say this is what we do here. This is how we do it. And it's very, very helpful. Probably the best example I've seen of that locally is up at Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Penasquitos. They have a very, very well organized and well documented ministry, and so it makes it very easy for them to orient folks that are new to the ministry. Liturgical and prayer resources are important. Also to share with the deacons and the clergy. So, if, May is a big mental health month. November also and October. So there's resources that they can include in homilies and then can be available after Mass in terms of prayer resources. Um, I mentioned the referral process. This is important because a lot of folks will come if they know there's a mental health ministry at a parish, they will come there seeking referral. So just it's important to be able to provide that to local mental health providers. And then the other thing I think is very important, it kind of goes with the plan, is some periodic reflection on the impact of the ministry. Are people engaging with the ministry? Is there an impact? Is it a positive impact? Um, are we, doing too many um, guest speaking type things, or do we need to do more, prayer focused things? Because you really have to follow what the needs of the parish are, and so that reflective piece is very, very important. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Fratelli Tutti. So I found these images and I thought they were very important, or they resonated with me. One obviously is the one of Pope Francis, just surrounded by um, all sorts of folks, right? Different ages, different ethnicities, and all walking together and hand in hand. And so that idea of social friendship and fraternity and solidarity is really, really resonant in this encyclical. Um, Also, I really like this image of this. I guess it's an icon of the Good Samaritan. I think is a really powerful image that's also part of Fratelli Tutti. And then this image of the two hands, right? You have a older person here, and their hands are in contact with a much younger person, so that reaching out over generations and connecting in fraternity is very, very resonant. So Fratelli Tutti, let's talk a little bit more about that. I took this picture last week when I was, yeah, I took a side trip to Assisi, and it was fantastic. As you can see, just a perfect day, and beautiful, beautiful spot. I'm sure many of you have been there since you're Franciscans, right? Um, but at any rate, I put that up there because Fratelli Tutti was inspired by an expression of Saint Francis, and Pope Francis signed the letter there in Assisi in October 2020. I don't know exactly where, but this is looking back at the basilica from the garden there. And it's based on this idea, as you probably know, of universality of human fraternity and social friendship. Both, just very, very important concepts for any ministry, right? And the idea that we're a single human family sharing a common home, and we open our hearts to encounter. And so, as we were, and Keith, I mentioned you earlier in the talk. I saw see that you joined. That through a conversation we had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, you had mentioned Fratelli Tutti as a potential lens to look at mental health ministry. So, these elements, especially opening our hearts to encounter the universality of fraternity and social friendship, I really feel these are essential components for guiding lay ministry. And that's what's gotten me, thinking about this, and now, trying to put these thoughts together in a coherent package. As a framework for Catholic mental health ministry, the elements I see where there's significant overlap and where there's real like you can kind of see a direct connection is from the encyclical, this idea of darkness over a closed world. And we live in a trying time, and I see that in my students regularly, where they're easily discouraged just by what's going on in the our society and the world at large. And the church can be a light in that, and the ministry can help open our church communities. I Like I mentioned, I have a graduate assistant, sometimes for 2 years and sometimes for only a year. But I see these, and these are all folk, 20 something. So I think my current graduate student assistant is probably 23 or 24, and they really get involved in this work, and they're often surprised that, and this is a little embarrassing. They're surprised that a faculty member is working so closely with church communities. I'm embarrassed because we're a Catholic university, right? It seems like that would not be that surprising. But they're so eager, right, and willing to do this, and going above and beyond, with the social media, and we do some other things. They organize some volunteer events where we're connecting with other ministries out in the diocese. But that they become sort of the proverbial candle in the night, right? So they're helping to open our communities to help overcome this darkness, and open up the world. The other element of Fratelli Tutti is the Good Samaritan, the stranger on the road. And it's the idea of accompaniment, right? So we accompany people with no judgment, with no consideration of who they are, just that they're another person, right? And that's enough. And so the folks dealing with mental illness have faced many challenges. Many times it's a family member also we're accompanying, and it's just important to be that Samaritan as these folks are healing, right? Or as they're dealing with this, whether it's the family member or the person with the mental illness themselves. Um, it's also important to envision from Fratelli Tutti, envisioning and engendering an open world, right? So we go out to the margins, and the idea is to reach out to folks who are marginalized by mental illness. There's still significant stigma in right up to the present. I mean, we had an issue at a parish where there was a woman who was not housed, and she was obviously struggling with severe mental illness, probably schizophrenia, and so she had started sleeping on the church campus, and this particular church had benches, and there was a sheltered area, and so it was you know a offered some security. She was still outside, but she was off the ground and in an area where there was basically two walls that would offer some shelter. And she was there for I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months. And over time, the decision was made by the church leadership, parish leadership, to remove those benches. And unfortunately, that was a signal for her to move on. And so that marginalization, that pushing people away, is still happening, and even in our own communities. So we want to envision something better than that, right? And make sure we are reaching out to those folks that are marginalized and continue to be marginalized. And then this leads into the my final point here from Fratelli Tutti, and that's renewed encounter. I mean, Pope Francis called for this renewed encounter, and I think that's really essential, that we focus on that person to person, connection, heart to heart, with those that have been made vulnerable by stigma. I think of, and this woman's name was Mary, and Mary is going to get worse the longer she stays on the street, and that's just a fact. That's what happens, unfortunately, with homelessness. And then you compound that with mental illness, and so it's very important for us to connect with those folks person to person. It's not that I'm going to cure her, right? It's not that I'm connecting her with her out of pity. It's that's my sister there, right? And so we want to connect at that level with dignity. I mean, treat Mary with the dignity that that she's endowed with. And so that's where I am in terms of connecting Fratelli Tutti with Catholic mental health ministry. I think there's a lot of overlap. There's other elements in Fratelli Tutti that talk about world politics and things like that. Certainly, those are connected to marginalization of folks with mental health, but these four elements I think really had direct application to the ministry. So I wanted to share those. Um, as far as integration of this, I think, let me get ahead of myself. The integration of Fratelli Tutti as a framework really helps situate the Catholic mental health ministry movement within a broader sort of moral and social vision of our church. And that's important, especially when, we still meet resistance with some clergy who don't understand why we should do this. Why do I need a mental health ministry? Isn't that something the providers deal with, the therapists and the psychologists and those. And and so being able to embed it more or connect it to something like Fratelli Tutti, I think helps translate it and be able to communicate it as like I said, part of this broader moral and social vision. It also transforms the ministry from just a set of tasks, right? It's not just having the events or handing out the prayer cards. It becomes a manifestation of these ideas of solidarity and encounter and literally universal fraternity. And that's when the ministry is at its best, right? So the first example I shared with the woman who had struggled with bipolar throughout her life, and she really became part of the parish, right, and embedded in parish life, and um, you know, I don't know why, but the idea of hearing her call by name really resonated with me at after Mass, and just and I think a lot of our parishes are like this. After Mass is an opportunity for this encounter, for the social friendship, and people linger and talk and offer each other support and things like that, and check in. And she was part of that, right? You know, um, she was no longer, and I'm just going to use a pseudonym, Jane with bipolar disorder. She was just another member of the parish, right? And she was there with her friends and in solidarity with the rest of us. And then finally, it becomes a demonstration that accompaniment and care for those with mental health problems is really integral to this idea of human fraternity and for our mission of healing and inclusion. We want to become that healing presence here in the world, and so as we um, accompany folks, as we offer care, it's evidence of that, right? It's us living up to what we proclaim. Okay, the other element, and I'm going to close with this prayer. This was in Fratelli Tutti, and this I think really resonates with me. And Oremus is let us pray, I believe in Latin. So, Lord Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. And I'm definitely going to include this going forward in probably the next edition of the book because I think it's such a wonderful um, prayer for this work for I mean for us in general, but definitely for the ministry. So with that, I want to open it up for questions and